All right, we're doing a little experiment. I have my buddy Dan here. He's an emergency doctor. We're gonna call this episode the first inaugural Fishing for Thought. And we're just going to be fishing here on a beautiful winter day in Marina Del Rey and see what we can catch. This is Dan.
What's up, guys? Dude, I'm honored to be here.
Can you tell a little bit about who you are? Who is Dan? What are you up to?
Work in progress. I am an ER doctor out here in LA, and did my training up in Boston. Moved out here a couple years ago, and sort of have been spending a lot of time thinking about how we think during a crisis, how we think during an emergency, and how we can train ourselves to upgrade our thought process and our protocols and everything, and to be able to bring the best version of ourselves to bear when it really matters. And I've been lucky enough over the last year and change to get to be your friend and talk through a lot of these things. And happy to be sitting here on this dock with you now, man.
Yeah, appreciate it, man. Yeah, we've been having a lot of good conversations over the last 6-7 months.
Yeah.
And you're writing a new book.
Nice.
So I'm curious on, because I'm a big fan of Stoic philosophy, and it's helped me a lot, especially in the early days and the later days of like entrepreneurship. So when you're saying that you're bringing it to kind of emergency medicine and all that stuff, I'm really fascinated by that. Do you?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts? Like, how'd you get into Stoic philosophy, and what do you find beneficial about it?
Yeah. I mean, I got into it through actually this other guy, James Allen, who's this like turn of the century sort of like early industrial period English writer and I guess industrialist. I grew up doing martial arts and was really lucky to have a coach that sort of focused not only on the physical aspect but on training your mind and thinking about how to think. And he gave me this book called As a Man Thinketh by James Allen. It's a really interesting book. And there's a quote in it that goes, in the armory of thought, we forge, or sorry, let me restart that. Man is made or unmade by himself. In the armory of thought, he forges the weapons with which he destroys himself, or the tools with which he builds heavenly mansions of joy and strength and peace. And that's just like such an amazing, deep idea.
Yeah.
You know, and it sort of hit me at the right time. I was like maybe 17 or 18. I was just starting to think for myself a little bit, you know. And the idea that we're sort of both like the blacksmith and the forge and the thing we're forging at the same time, right? The idea that you can work on yourself and you can work on your thoughts, and that whatever you're sort of starting with doesn't have to be your ending point. That was like a really deep, powerful thing. And so I sort of started branching out from that idea and trying to think about, well, who else, like how can I train myself to be a better blacksmith of my own thoughts?
Mm-hmm.
I read some Buddhist philosophy, which is totally amazing, and at some point ended up reading, coming across Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor, who was also a Stoic philosopher. He wrote this book called Meditations. Meditations is Marcus Aurelius's notes to himself. Essentially, it's basically like his notes. If you keep the blacksmith metaphor for a minute, it's like his notes on forging, on what he's done for himself and the experiments he's run on himself, and it survived amazingly intact. And the stuff in it is just incredible. It was an amazing introduction to Stoic philosophy as a whole, which originally started in sort of Greco-Roman times and was named after this place called the Stoa, or the Porch, where the original philosophers of this sort of line of thought used to gather. It sort of disappeared for a while, or not disappeared, but sort of dropped out of the public eye. And then over the last several years, it's been making sort of a more popular comeback. And thanks to a lot of the work of people like Ryan Holiday and like Tim Ferriss and Jocko Willink and some of these other folks that are doing a lot of work on sort of re-energizing this field. But Marcus Aurelius' Meditations is like an awesome introduction to it. And so I would be reading this stuff and I'd be thinking about it, and I know we can dig through some of the tenets of it, but one of the that one, Cormac caught a fish.
Oh, come on, man. Share the wealth.
That looked delicious. Maybe a little small for us.
Oh. Anchovies, man.
Anchovies, nice.
Lower mercury.
I don't know, I mean, one of the like really wonderful and also really intense parts of what I do is that, I go up to bat every day with these life and death situations and these truly deep emergencies that require this different skill set, this different mind from your everyday life. And the Stoics talk a lot about death and about coming to terms with that and about sort of figuring out where you're able to make your mark on the universe, and then otherwise letting the universe do what it will. And the more I trained in emergency medicine, the more these things sort of started converging, right? Like, you're in an emergency, the way you act, where you put your energy, how you feel about life and death can make the difference for somebody. So there was this sort of natural coming together process of that, and that's what the book is going to be about, right? It's going to be about sort of like how to think during an emergency and how Stoic philosophy trains us to do that.
That's impressive. So I know you're at about 3 chapters deep, a couple of chapters deep, and this is your first book, right?
It is, yeah. It's been awesome to start to.
Yeah, maybe you can tell a little bit about what's that process like to kind of like sit down, and I know we're still young, but what's it like to kind of do that writing process and reflecting?
It's been interesting, man. I mean, there's been some expected and some unexpected parts to it, right? Like, I never thought it'd be easy to put these like sort of vague. What do we got?
Had a bite.
Got a bite?
Had a bite. Dang.
Little nibble.
Ah. I was gonna change it, but I guess not.
Maybe not, huh? Yeah. Nice.
I wasn't even thinking about it. I was like, nothing's gonna come get me, and I'm like, oh, I'm getting a bite.
Right on.
Cool.
Yeah. But going from, like anything, like I am not a master of this by any stretch of the imagination, right? Like, I'm learning my own way through it, but taking the discipline to sit down and put some vague ideas into more, thought that's still fluid but a little more solid, and to be able to share it with people and talk to folks. It's going to be us really soon.
I know, I can't wait.
That's been a great process of figuring out, like, well, what is it that I actually think and why. It's also been some pretty amazing therapy, honestly, as I dig through some of the hardest cases I've ever gone through and stuff that I've been a part of and haven't really processed in a lot of ways. Like, writing it down and bringing those lessons to other people has been a really great part of that. The idea of the book is that we can upgrade the way that we respond in an emergency, and so it sort of starts off talking about some of the basic principles, and then moves into the this idea of praxis, right? That there's no philosophy, there's no truth that's apart from day-to-day life, and how do we bring things together into it. Nice.
What is your first chapter on?
The first chapter just sort of lays out some of the ideas and talks about, what is actually an emergency, right? And I think, ER doctor or not, all of us will face emergencies at some point in our life just by the fact that we're alive and we go through it. And maybe we'll get one or two. And so we end up treating a lot of things that aren't really emergencies as if they are crises, just because we either don't have the skills to cope with them, or we don't deploy the skills in the right way. But what distinguishes a true emergency? And the idea is really that the mind, the everyday mind that we have and that we use, and that is important for getting us through our day-to-day life with joy and with peace and with happiness. Like, that mind doesn't always work when it's really an emergency. And you really need this other thing, this emergency mind, that you have to train and prepare. And you have to be able to click it on when it really counts. And so the idea of this first chunk is like, just like, what are the facets of something that make it an emergency? How do you know and feel when it's happening? And to start to train you to get into the idea of, like, when it's not an emergency, don't force it to be an emergency if it isn't one,
Mm-hmm.
right? But when it is, you turn on and you go. I think it's most of the ER doctors I work with have this sort of innate thing where the more time you spend around like really sick and really dying and really suffering people that are really going through emergencies, the less seriously you take a lot of the other sort of like parts of life. For better or for worse, it tends to make us, like, maybe not the best, like, romantic partners or like family members, but well, hey. But I think you get a sense of what really matters and what sort of just feels on the surface like it's important.
Now, do you find
I'm
that...
sure there's some metaphor for fishing in there, but I'm not sure.
Probably, yeah, absolutely. Now, when I found Stoicism, it really helped me get through a lot of tough times, because especially in the entrepreneurial world, there's a lot of things that, you might, for me, I believed everybody was like a nice person. Then you get into situations where, money's involved and you're like, whoa, and why are people making these decisions? And then, it's like Stoicism was nice to be able to kind of just take a step back and, like, not let your emotions dictate too much of
sure.
But like you're saying, it does also, after a time, almost desensitize you to some of the emotions that make life interesting. And so my question is, you're seeing pain, death on a daily basis, at sometimes every 30 minutes, if not more, right? How is I guess, how do I phrase this? How are you coping? Like, how do you, because you've told me, some of the stuff you've never processed ever, and it might be your first day on the job and you saw a dead person, and it's like you bottle that up. How do you bring that to life and kind of like let that not consume you subconsciously?
I mean, I think that's processing what happens to us is a skill, and it's a skill we can get better at through training.
Yeah.
Right. And I think there's a couple cool ways to go from there, right? So there's this quote by I think it's Feynman, the physicist, right? And he goes, just because I know how the stars work, do you think that makes me love them more or less? And the idea that, like, just because you have a different perspective on things doesn't mean you don't see the beauty in what's going on around you.
Right.
And so I think definitely a critique level that Stoicism, from a number of ideas, is that Stoics don't feel emotion. Stoics don't, they wall themselves off from these things. But I don't think that's actually true. I mean, that's sort of how the word Stoicism is used, where a Stoic is used sort of in everyday language. But that's not actually, like, if you read the writings of the Stoics, that's not really what they're talking about, right? In fact, they have this really cool concept, amor fati, which is Latin for love your fate. And it's the idea that, like, whatever hand of cards you're dealt, you should play it, because that's the only hand you have. But not only should you play it, you should try to play it with joy and with love. And you should bring that sort of fierce, wild joy into everything that you do. And I think that the more I train on this stuff, and the more I consciously think about death and the shortness of life and the reality of all the stuff that you're saying, the happier I end up being, actually.
Interesting.
And the more at peace I end up being, because I might never be on a dock like this again, right? Like, this might be my last day to enjoy this. And if it is, then you realize you never know. And so you take that moment of joy where you find it, and you don't demand it's anything else. You just sort of sit there with it. And I think that with, we talked to each other about that idea about like where do you find the joy in the middle of all these things. And a lot of it's little small moments, making a joke with a patient and connecting with somebody in the time when they're really having, like what is maybe the worst day of their entire life, right? And sometimes you can just bring a little bit of joy. You can do a little bit of amor fati in that moment.
So what is the second chapter going to cover?
Yeah, and this is the first big skill, right? Is the centerpiece of the Stoic. And I'm curious if you think the same thing about this, right?
Okay.
Given the reading that you've done, which is that for me the sort of first centerpiece of Stoicism is coming to grips with the idea that you're going to die, that we're all going to die, right? That we're all temporary, and that we have a short, finite amount of time here, and we don't know how long that is. I forget who said it, that we're all running a race, but we don't know if it's a sprint or a marathon.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, right. And that understanding that death is going to come for all of us is sort of the first step in thinking through the more Stoic thoughts about the purpose of life and how to live it. It's certainly an important thing during an emergency to come to terms with. Mostly because it knowing that death is not the enemy, and that in fact it's a thing that we all experience, like prepares you for it when it happens, and also frees you from a lot of fear, and it lets you act much more fluidly and much more calmly. So the whole second chapter is about that, about this Stoic concept of memento mori, right? Remember that you are going to die. Sometimes translated as to remember you're mortal, or actually as a noun, a memento mori is an object which is supposed to serve to remind you that you're going to die, right? So that's this for me, actually. That's the first of my Stoic tattoos, right? So this circle on my left wrist here, which is where an ivy was when I was really sick one time and almost bought the farm. So this is the reminder that memento mori. I don't know how long I have. I don't know when the next thing's going to come get me. I wanted to have like a memento mori, you were going to die, but I figured that'd be really bad. I'm like examining a patient and my arm says you were going to die. That's maybe like giving the wrong message, and so
they need to find stoicism not at that exact moment.
Right,
maybe
you have to be perhaps prepared for it. But it makes me think of the story of the Battle of Thermopylae, right?
That sounds very familiar. I would need to know that.
The Spartans versus the Persians, right? Like the hot gates, right? Popularized in the movie 300, right? So there's that quote that it's sort of unclear who said it, but basically they're like, oh, the Persians are so many that their arrows are going to blot out the sun.
Yeah, I
right? And the response being like, wonderful. Then today we will get to fight in the shade.
And that's it, right there.
And like that
100%.
idea of like, today is the best day until tomorrow.
Yeah.
Right? Which is, by the way, an amazing song by this Scottish punk band, the Real McKinseys, which I would totally recommend. But today is the best day until tomorrow, right? Like whatever you're dealt is what you're dealt, and you try to bring to it what you can. Years. Well, actually, and this was not a plant, but the third chapter that I've been writing is actually called "It's the Best Day Till Tomorrow."
Oh, that's great.
Talks about the idea of like coming to grips with whatever you're in the middle of, and realizing that like whatever you have today is the best day from which to work, because it is the only day from which to work. Right?
100%.
This is all you get. It doesn't mean you have to like it, right? It doesn't mean you have to be thrilled with whatever cards you have, but it's what you have, and so it's what you have to deal with. You ever read Candide?
No.
Voltaire?
No.
Really interesting book.
I've been meaning to read some Voltaire, though. I hear he's very good.
I can't say I've read anything other than Candide by him, but in Candide there's this character named Pangloss, and Pangloss is...
Sounds very familiar.
Yeah, he's famous for saying that like no matter what happens, like this is the best of all possible worlds. That's like his philosophy, and the book is in many ways about sort of like these competing philosophies and how they approach and deal with like the realness of life. Pangloss is, I think, appropriately painted to be this sort of like buffoonish character that like terrible terrible shit happens, and he's like, oh, it's the best of all possible worlds. Like, you know, what is the quote he says? He's like, despair and tragedy are just merely shadows in the painting of life. And like, there's some truth to that idea, right? That like, there's like goodness in whatever happens, but I think there's a fundamental difference between saying like, today is the best day we have, versus this is the best of all possible worlds, right? And one lets you account for the fact that there are bad things, and those bad things are real.
Yeah.
And you have to prepare for them and deal with them with whatever you're given. And the other sort of, you know, creates this panacea. I don't know if that's the right word for it. It creates this.
It's almost a facade.
Yeah, this like fakeness to
Yeah.
it, right? That doesn't acknowledge like the deep truth about what's sometimes like painful and terrible. I feel like there's a word for that. Pollyanna, maybe? I don't know. Anyway.
Wow. I'm interested in going a little bit deeper into these like understanding that life is short.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I've had friends, you know, who have done, you know, some kinds of, let's say like a psychedelic or something, and had a bad trip, felt like they were going to die, and that was, you know, the best thing that they could have done, because it showed them that their mind, how powerful their mind is, first of all, but then it also showed, you know, that this is what happened. Theoretically, this would be what it's like to die.
Yeah.
So you've kind of experienced death, and now you can live the rest of your life knowing that you've kind of seen what that's like, so you should make your lifetime better.
Yeah.
Do you think that that's very similar to seeing people come in who do pass away on your table? Or do you think it's better to experience it firsthand using something? Or whether it could be through meditation, it could be through spiritual, it could, whatever. Thoughts on that?
I don't, you know, I think that's an individual question and answer. I think that all of us have to come to grips with the fact that we are mortal and that we will die.
Yeah.
And, you know, each life and each death is different. Each person probably has their own journey to understanding that.
Interesting.
I think that seeing death and understanding that death happens to everybody and everything, that change happens to everybody and everything, is an important piece of it. And that sometimes that's easiest understood when you're you know, watching it happen in something else, right? But I do think that whatever you do, whatever tack you take on it, some of it has to be done thinking about your own death, right? So there was this thing in Japan for a long time about death poems, right? And it was the idea that when you're about to die, you write a poem as sort of your final gift, your final thought to humanity. I'm going to butcher the pronunciation of it, but I think it's called jinsei, is the type of poem, type of poetry. And there's this great book of it that I have next to my bed of Japanese death poems, and so this is like my nightly ritual. It's like
Interesting.
a death poem before I go to bed every night.
Love it.
Occasionally there's some friends that I like text one to every now and then. Well, I'll send you one.
Do you have one that you go to back to all the time?
So one that I've been looking at lately is I forget the guy's name, but it just goes, "Oh young folk, if you're afraid of death, just die now. Then you'll live the rest of your life never afraid." Right? And it's this great idea of like what you're saying. Like, part of that's about being like, yo, just practice dying, right?
Yeah.
Just like think through what it would be like, and what would you regret? What would you feel good about? Would you feel like you've done with your life what you need to be doing?
Yep.
And if the answer is no, and you're still alive, phenomenal.
Yep.
Go out there and get it done.
Right.
Right?
100%.
There's this other one, similar vein, that's like, if today is my day to die, and I die, so be it. If today is my day to die and I do not, even better.
That's very samurai.
Right? Yeah.
It's very.
Yeah. But I think about that a lot. I think about the Egyptian concept of the afterlife, right? So you go to this room or whatever, and they take your heart out, and they put it on one side of the scale, And on the other side of the scale is an ostrich feather, which is maybe called like a mat, M-A-apostrophe-A-T, I think is how you spell it. And the question is, does your heart balance this feather of truth? Right? Defined really loosely as whatever you think will balance the feather of truth for you. If your heart balances, then you go on to the afterlife. And if your heart doesn't, then I think you're eaten by this thing that's like half alligator, half hippopotamus. I'm not actually really sure what that part is, but the idea that, you know, like whenever you die, you're responsible for the weight of your heart and what you did with your life. I think that really resonates for me a lot, right? And so if you think about like that idea of, oh, if you're afraid of death, just die now, then you won't be afraid. And you combine it with this idea of like, oh, well, when I'm dead, I'm supposed to balance my life. Like you get this really cool thing, which is like you can forecast what it would feel like if you died right now, right? And you can be like, did I balance a feather today? Right?
Interesting.
So that's the other thing I have on my bed is this little thing of a feather that I turn upside down every day. And be like, okay, by the end of the day, like this has to be balanced again.
You have some of the coolest nightly rituals, man.
It's been a work in progress. I'm tweaking them a little bit. It's challenging with night shifts because then I'm like, I don't know, do you turn it over in the morning? Do you turn it over at night? Like I'm not really sure what to do with it yet, but it's a work in progress.
Do you have any other philosophies or things that you have combined, or are these the two?
Oh, tons. I mean, I think you know, my karate instructor growing up always used to say, look, you can learn two ways, right? You can learn by brute force figuring it out yourself, or you can learn by like talking to people that are smarter than you, that have been there before you. And you know, thankfully in this day and age we have access to just like an absurd, like an embarrassment of riches of knowledge, right? There's so many people out there that have stuff we can learn from and we can connect with. And you know, I think that's one of the ways that you and I started becoming friends is like this voracious appetite for reading and learning, right? And like always wanted to compare notes on like what we're digging into.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that first episode of Fishing for Thought. It was an experiment. If you want to hear more of things like this, of that nature, you know, kind of just finding random cool people who want to kind of share thoughts about life, definitely let me know. Shoot me an email at johnjon@castspear.com. Maybe give me some recommendations of topics you want me to cover or people you want me to chat with. If you're watching this on YouTube, definitely throw me a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you're listening to this on the podcast, thank you so much. Please subscribe as well. And until next time, keep those lines tight, everyone. See ya.